Hey everybody, it's Dion. I want to welcome you to the Friday, March 27th Hope Update. This is your Hope Update. I don't know about you, but I've actually seen so many signs of hope over the last few days alone. In the news, in the world around me, a couple of highlights that I just want to share with you. I find this fascinating. Tesla and GM are, I read, forming a collaboration to work on producing much needed ventilators. The British company Dyson, who makes the cool hand dryers and vacuums, they're doing the same. I heard that Ford, 3M, and GE were partnering together to make some medical supplies that are much needed, which is really exciting to me because we know that's an area of great need right now. I read about a prototype for a rapid 45-second COVID-19 test, which could, if it's good, could change the game with testing. I'm just encouraged to hear that someone thinks they might have something that would be beneficial like that. I'm hopeful because I heard the president is now looking at assigning like a risk assessment county by county instead of a nationwide mandate, looking at different regions and assigning risk levels so that different regions of our country who are less prone to virus contagion, they might get back to work sooner. That was really encouraging to me. Stimulus is coming. That means money for us, those of us who are especially financially stretched right now, maybe also money for whatever business or industry you're in, which hopefully will keep our economy going. I feel hopeful about that. And then here in St. Louis, at least, we've had some spring weather, which, I don't know if I've ever seen so many people outside taking walks and riding bikes. That's got me feeling hopeful. And hope is a really good thing. But the problem with hope, there is a problem with hope. The problem with hope is that it can cause us to get too far ahead of ourselves, and we can start to wonder, we can start to ask this question, okay, this feels really good, I feel hopeful, so when will this end? I don't know if you find yourself asking that question. I actually got baited the other day by The Atlantic into reading a whole article entitled, "When Will This End?" And it basically just says it'll end when the virus works its way through, and not the answer I was looking for. When will this end? It's a natural question whenever we're in an uncomfortable set of circumstances. And yet there's a lot of wisdom throughout the ages that can help us wrestle with that question, to know even how to address that question when it comes up in our minds. I think back to Vietnam era POWs, Commander James Stockdale, maybe you've heard the story before. He was in a POW camp with a lot of other soldiers, and he talked about who made it out of the camps, what was different about soldiers who made it out of POW camps versus those who did not make it out of the POW camps. And someone asked him once, what was the difference? Do you know? And he said, oh yeah, that's easy. He says, the people who didn't make it out were the optimists. You think, isn't it good to be hopeful, optimistic? And he said, no. See, the optimists, they always believed that they were going to get out tomorrow, that tomorrow was going to be the day, and then tomorrow would come and tomorrow wouldn't bring them freedom, and eventually they would fall into despair. But he also talked about how those who completely lost hope, those who lost all sight of hope, they didn't fare well in POW camps either. They eventually fell victim to the same despair that the optimists did. He said the people who survived were the people who kind of had a healthy pessimism. They had a healthy pessimism. They believed in the long run they would prevail, but they also knew that it would take some time before they saw freedom. See, Jesus kind of talks in the same way. The Bible does, even beyond Jesus, before Jesus. It warns us about getting too far ahead of ourselves. Psalm 119 is one of the first places, and maybe one of the best known places, where we hear this counsel from Scripture, advising us to take life one step at a time, knowing that our destination is good, that in the end we will prevail because we're God's people and God will always prevail, but also not getting too far ahead of ourselves. Psalm 119, you might know it, verse 105, your word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. That's a really special verse here at Pathfinder, but it's also a reminder of how we are to live. Maybe you've heard this before, that the idea that a lamp unto my feet, a light to my path means I don't see the whole journey. I just see my next step. I see enough to know whether it's safe to take the next step. That's all I see. And that's kind of how God advises us to live. I know for my kids, they've been asking the question a lot, like, when am I going to see my friends again? And there are articles saying, we're going to live this way for the next 18 months because it's going to take us that long to find find a vaccine. And I don't know about you, when I read those articles, it just fills me with despair. I think there's something about saying, hey, this might take a little while and life may look different, but in the end, we will prevail. God will have his way. We have nothing to fear. But along the way, we're just going to take the next step. It doesn't make sense to think about what life is going to be like 3 months from now, 6 months from now. I didn't know what life would look like even 2 weeks ago. I had no idea we'd be here right now. I think you're probably the same, right? And so the scripture tells us to take it one day at a time. Jesus in Matthew 6, he says something similar. He says, don't worry about tomorrow. This famous passage about worry. He says, don't worry, don't worry, don't worry. And then he says, don't worry about tomorrow, for each day has enough trouble of its own. And that's a reminder that we should stay focused on the trouble, the challenges, but also the opportunities of today. Doesn't make sense to get too far ahead of ourselves, but stay focused on today. What's before us today? What do we need to do today to be faithful? What do we need to do today to stay optimistic? That's why these prayer moments every 19 of the hour have been really helpful to me to ask God's favor, but also just to stay focused on what I can do today. And one of the things I can do today is to pray. Jesus talks about this in another way, and it blows my mind. Matthew chapter 24, he's talking about the end, truly the end. We say, when will this end? And Jesus is talking about the end of all time. And he says, an end is coming for us someday. But then he says this right after that, because the moment you say there's going to be an end, of course people are going, when is the end? And I know that right now in our times, people are saying, clearly this is the end. But here's what Jesus says about the end. He says, it's a fruitless question to ask when it's coming. Instead, he says this. He says, but about the day or hour, when the end is coming, about the day or hour, no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son. Jesus says, even I don't know, but only the Father. Even when we're talking about something as important as the end of time, Jesus says, you know what? You're not going to know when it's coming. It's coming someday, and you should live expectantly that it's coming. But, you just stay focused on today, because it's a fruitless question to ask when the end is coming. See, I hope that as you see signs, encouraging signs of hope in the world around you, you take note of those things. You're grateful for those things. I hope you also just take time for a gratitude practice through this whole moment. I know my wife and I text each other every day and say, what are 3 things you're grateful for? And it's enormously helpful. But it's also helpful not to get too far ahead of ourselves, not to worry about what life is going to be like a month, 2 months, 6 months from now, but instead just to stay focused on the here and now. So that's my word for you today. We live with hope, but we don't get too far ahead of ourselves. We believe that God will bring us through. And we know that even if we lose our life in this life, there's something better waiting for us. We do not fear. We know God will bring us through. He will prevail. He will win. He will never forsake his own. But we also live in the present moment, focused on the challenges and the growth opportunities, the mission opportunities, the gospel opportunities in this moment. There's a lot to be hopeful for. So let's be hopeful for the things that we can see today. That's your hope update for today. But before I move on, let me just say one thing. Live stream is coming again. Our weekend service is coming. And I'm really excited about the topic. We're going to talk about Sabbath, the ancient practice of Sabbath. This is something that we are terrible at in our culture. Sabbath is an intentional pushing back against the demands of life. It's taking a break and shifting into a different kind of gear. And I think that one of the things that God could be doing through this whole thing, whether he caused it or not, he's redeeming it for good. One of the things that God could be doing is teaching us how to Sabbath, how to take a break. We're kind of all doing that right now. So make sure you tune in for this weekend service. But here's what I want to say. I've noticed after doing a couple of these services with my family, I've noticed that there's some best practices that can make the online worship experience a richer experience for you. We try to do our best on our end to provide a great service for you, but we can only control so much. You can control the rest. So as you think about this weekend, here are a couple tips that I just want to put before you to help this weekend's worship experience be the best it can be for you. The first is prepare in advance. If you're just tuning in at 9 when the service premieres, make sure that you're not kind of like turning on the TV, yelling for the kids, making breakfast, getting your coffee while it's going. Do all of that stuff in advance. If you can get yourself settled, if you have coffee, even if you have a light breakfast there, if you can have that done in advance before the service starts, it's gonna be a better experience for you. And I'd also caution you against doing too many other things at the same time, eating a full breakfast. Maybe a cup of coffee is fine, or a cup of tea, but please don't do too much, because just like in a worship service when you're sitting in a sanctuary, the fewer the distractions for yourself, the richer the experience will be. Maybe think about your environment at home. And that may mean doing it in a special space in the house, or setting up the furniture differently, or dimming the room, or lighting a candle. Create some sense of sacred space. So if it's in your living room, you do a lot of things in your living room. Is there something you can bring into your living room to suddenly make it feel like, oh, we're not just in our living room right now, we're actually in a holy space. We're about to worship God together, or alone, however it is for you. I'd encourage you to do that. I'd also encourage you to turn up the volume loud on your TV, loud enough so that you can sing and not feel embarrassed or self-conscious, or that the other people that you might be streaming with can also sing. And then for those of you who have young kids, think in advance about how you can keep your kids occupied if they're not able to sit through the service with you. That can be an incredible distraction, I know. And on weekends when we're here, we have children's ministry. We do have resources available through our kids ministry for you if you have young kids. But that may mean getting your kids set up with something before you start the service. That may mean taking turns. If you've got a spouse at home, maybe that means taking turns, or maybe that means actually watching the service, participating in the service when your kids are sleeping. I just encourage you to make a plan before the service starts of how you're going to approach worship this weekend, because I've noticed that when I have a plan, when my family has a plan, it's a much more meaningful experience. So I can't wait to see you this weekend again. Hang in there, keep praying. God is with us, He's for us. We have nothing to fear. He will see us through. Along the way, just stay focused on the challenges and the opportunities of today. God bless.